Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great event on tap, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for any of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your question, and we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. We also have a polling question coming up to kick off today's webinar, so hopefully we'll get everybody involved with that. And finally, at the end of today's webinar, we are going to be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is AWS Well-Architected. Build better architecture, better business. Our speakers today are JT Geary, who is CEO and founder of NOps, John Ray, who's a director of solutions engineering at NOps, and Matt Yanchishin, director of solutions architecture at AWS. Hi guys, thanks so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
JT, I know you're going to be kicking things off, but let's go ahead and start with that polling question that I alluded to at the top of the hour. And I'm going to go ahead and launch it so everybody can take part. The question is, how familiar are you with AWS Well-Architected? If everybody could go ahead and just take a second or two to make your selection from very familiar, utilizing today, have heard of it, or no awareness. Go ahead and make your selection. And real quick, just want to remind the audience that today's event is being recorded. So if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on demand. The slides will be available as well. Okay, let's go ahead and we're getting a pretty healthy selection here. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys about 5 more seconds, then we'll close it out in 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, looking at the poll results, looks like the majority of folks have heard of it, but they maybe aren't utilizing it today. So gentlemen, I hope that helps you. I'm gonna go ahead and hide the results and let you get right.
Thank you, Charlene. That's actually very helpful. And hi, everyone. I'm very excited about today's webinar. My name is JT Geary, and I'm the CEO of NOps. And just a little bit of background on myself. I've been migrating companies to AWS ever since EC2 was in beta. So I have had the opportunity to work with a lot of companies. And you know, I'm very excited about the framework and and just what it allows companies to do. In my opinion, is probably one of the best ways to to kind of evaluate your decisions on AWS when you're building new workloads, when you're migrating new workloads, or when you're maintaining workloads on AWS. If you're not familiar with NOps, we're an advanced AWS technology partner. One of the things that is as unique about NOps is how we kind of align with the well-architected framework. So not only we help companies with cost and security visibility, we also cover other pillars like reliability, performance, and operation excellence. So we'll be talking about that as we go along further here with the webinar. Before we dive in, I do want to give a shout out to all the AWS Consulting Partners who are supporting today's webinar. We will be discussing different ways you can do well-architected assessment. You can leverage partners, and these partners could not only do the assessment, but they can also help you to remediate some of the issues that they might discover during the assessment. Let me just quickly go over the agenda. It sounds like some of you have already heard of Well-Architected. and some of you, for some of you, this is a new concept. So Matt will be going over what is well-architected. We'll talk about some of the exciting updates to the framework, cloud financial management. This is timely because, in these times, everyone is trying to reduce their costs. So I think you guys will find a lot of value in going over these new updates. And then we'll do a demo at the end. We'll demonstrate how you can leverage NOps to actually make well-architected more actionable. So Matt, I think this is a perfect segue for people who never heard of well-architected or who are somewhat familiar. What is well-architected, and why does it exist?
Great. Well, first of all, JT and John, thanks for having me. You've been great partners, and I'm excited to be here on today's webinar. Before I dive in, just real quick, who am I, and why am I talking to you today? I've been with AWS for 8 years, so I've been using AWS also since the EC2 beta. So JT, you and I share that in common. And over 8 years at AWS, we joke that that's about 800 years in human years. I've seen a lot. I've worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of customers and partners now. I used to lead the technical teams for the AWS Global Partner Organization, and a couple of years ago, moved over to run well-architected AWS solutions and other things because I saw the potential for really helping our customers help themselves even better. AWS, and JT, you'll remember this, started out as a self-service offering, very much so. And over the years, we've built out an amazing partner ecosystem, a lot of tooling. But really, one thing we pride ourselves on is helping really make it easy for customers to build in the cloud. So, if you move to the next slide, one thing I've noticed with customers is that a lot of us move to agile developer methodologies and ways to better measure and test code over the last decade. I know I certainly did with the development teams that I've led, and we're much better at answering the question, is this code built well? We have automated testing. Are our teams performing well? You can look at the burn down charts for Agile. But then think of what you're building in the cloud with AWS. Can you answer that same question? Can you say, how am I measuring, or do I know how well I've built something in the cloud? And if you really think about it, especially for complex architecture, that's actually really difficult, and so that's why Well-Architected was built, because customers were asking us over and over again, can you give us a way to better document and measure what we're building in the cloud? Can you help us answer this question? Are you well-architected? So if you go to the next slide, what we came up with was initially a framework. And we had a framework, basically a bunch of questions and a set of consistent standard best practices that we felt that we should follow internally. And like so often with Amazon and with AWS, we like to build software well, and we want to extend that to our customers as well. So we said, hey, how can we externalize our best practices for building well in the cloud to our customers? So we built Well-Architected in the form of a framework, and now it's a tool in the AWS console as well. And we have a partner program, integrating with NOps, for example, or consulting partners like nClouds or Bellfleur. And we said, well, what if we could externalize not just the learnings, how to build well, but also a mechanism for how to measure and how to actually improve those things. And so that's what Well-Architected is it's really a mechanism. It's not just a white paper. It used to be many years ago. It's evolved into much more than that. It's a set of tooling. It's a partner program, and it's really a way of life for the cloud, a mechanism to build better. So I want to talk about how we're going to do that. So if you go into the next slide.
Matt, if you don't mind, maybe just quickly want to touch on the previous slide. I've seen AWS SAs delivering these well-architected assessments, and I think most of the time when customers are building infrastructure, they kind of don't know, or they have not taken the time to kind of look at, like, is this well-architected? Is this workload well-architected, right? So having that framework and working with partners and with Amazon SAs, and I've been part of these assessments myself many times. It's just amazing the value the customer gets out of it. It's the clarity, like what's important, if the security is important, we were able to help the customer to focus more towards security. If cost is important, we were able to use the framework to reduce their costs. So just wanted to kind of touch on that. It's just very powerful, and I've seen it like firsthand working with the customers.
Well, thanks for that. And yeah, actually, a big part of my job through things like Well-Architected is to try our best to externalize the value that we can bring to customers with partners and with solutions architects. So what I mean by that is, I would love to be able to go sit with every one of the AWS customers. I'd love to send JT. You're a great partner. It'd be great to send you, but we can't. We can't reach every single customer. And what we've learned too is we can't get to every single engineer at every customer, even if we're in at the customer. Our largest customers have thousands of engineers, thousands of architects, and they're building at scale. So how can we create a framework and mechanism to really take the best of the value that you get out of both solutions architects and partners and give that to customers so they can do it themselves? And that's where the real power comes in. So I think we think most about risks, and I actually talk a lot about issue avoidance. Is if you are able to fix that security issue before it becomes a problem, if you're able to save money before you get that bill, if you're able to make things go faster so you don't lose customers in the key transition, you're saving money or making a lot more money. You're avoiding. There's a cost of issue avoidance that we like to talk about Well-Architected, but it also helps you move faster. If you think about how you go about building something in the cloud, most customers have, or big customers have an office with CTO, and they have templates and they have a set of tooling and standards that they use. Well, what if you could introduce Well-Architected and have a set of best practices that allow you to deploy consistently following best practices every time, instead of having to go back to the SA and ask that question, is this thing built well? You can measure that, you can document it, you can do it yourself. So you can make informed decisions that actually help you move faster as a company. And we've seen, customers like Cox Automotive that we'll talk about later, and tons of global customers, both large and small, able to actually move faster when they embrace Well-Architected. And in addition, things get better over time because it's a framework and a mechanism, not just a tool. We find that engineers and architects at customers learn over time. They learn best practices, and you actually build that muscle. You build that architecture muscle within your organization, and that becomes really powerful because then you have, an amazing cadre of AWS qualified solutions architects that know how to build following best practices. So if you go to the next slide, you can see how we've arranged it. So we've arranged it with pillars, which are the 5 pillars of our well-architected frameworks. And really that's like the foundations of how we believe you should build in the cloud to be successful. And then that gets translated into design principles. And then we filter that down to questions. As you'll see in the demos that John and JT are giving later, you'll see the questions that we actually ask, and you can augment those with your own questions that are specific to your own operating processes and own applications. So let's get into the meat. Let's go to the next slide and jump right in there. I was heartened to hear that, significant over 75% of you have heard or are already using Well-Architected. So I won't dwell on this, but for the 26% who may have not, let me touch upon the 5 pillars of Well-Architected. And we like to call ourselves solutions architects, and actually there's a lot in common between buildings and construction and architecture and software and infrastructure architecture in the cloud. Without a good foundation, you're not going to be able to build a good structure. So I really think of these as the foundational elements upon which you can repeatedly build good solutions in the cloud. So operational excellence, if your teams, especially large teams, can't function well and cohesively, you're not going to be able to move quickly. Security is always, job zero at AWS, and it should be for our customers too. Reliability, it's, the cloud has come so far over the last decade, but you still need to build for high availability whenever you can. And you want to move quickly. You want your applications to respond quickly. Anyone who's ever built a retail website, for example, will tell you about the drop-off in orders with every millisecond of delays and latency you see. And finally, cost. We're seeing customers save so much money in the cloud, but it pains me. We like to be gloriously dissatisfied. And what that means is that I want to save customers 10 times more than they're saving today. So they took that lift to the cloud, and how can we save even more by adopting, for example, like serverless and saving on that legacy compute that you've been using for years. So we break it into 5 pillars, and then that then gets into the design principles. And if you go to the next slide. So design principle is actually taking this sort of theory and making it into a specific principle that you can follow and then apply to your workload. So, more specifics, because there's a lot of sort of theory about how to build things well in the cloud, but how do you actually translate that to questions that you can ask of your workload as you're building it in all phases of the design and then implement it properly? So if we get into the questions next level down in the next slide, you'll see an example of this. So the pillar area, and so in this case, it's intentionally phrased to be an open-ended question to really start a conversation. So if you look at the questions, it'll ask the question, so you can then go back to your teams and look at the architecture you've built and ask yourselves these questions and then adjust your approach. We have the question, the context, and then a set of best practices specific to that question. We have several questions for every single pillar, and then we've started to release something called lenses recently, which is workload specific guidance. So that's a superset of questions, for example, serverless. So you can have serverless lens or a FinServ lens or a machine learning lens, an additional set of questions that you can ask on top of the baseline foundations that help you really derive the best practices so that you can document what you've built in a standard way and then measure how it's doing against best practices. So if you go to the next slide, what's really important is that you should be doing these evaluations at all phases. So I mentioned that there's a lot of parallels to, for example, agile methodologies or sort of developing at scale. When you do continuous testing, you're not just testing the code once and then forever good for every shipping. You're continuously testing your code every time it goes out. You're also doing regression testing. You're doing all sorts of testing to make sure that things are working well. You're doing usability, CX testing. It's the same with architecture and with what you've built in the cloud. You want to have that pre-launch review, but you need to have consistent reviews at every step of the journey. And this is something that I think our more mature customers using Well-Architected have recognized, and something that tools like NOps can really help you with. So as your team designs new systems and iterates on those systems, you can, through Well-Architected, hand them a set of questions they can ask themselves over and over again to make sure, for example, that they're following security best practices or that they're saving money at every turn. And you don't want those things to creep in later. So we have the review process in the tool that ensures a consistent way to measure and document it, or through partners and solutions like NOps. And then you can look across your entire technology portfolio. And that's where it gets really interesting, is customers have maybe thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of applications. And I was on with a customer just 2 weeks ago, a big financial services customer, and they showed me something that is similar to what you might have seen at Cox Automotive if you ever saw their presentations. And they have Well-Architected baked into their Agile process for all releases. So they have, I think in this case, they're using, well, like Cox Automotive using Rally, for example, and they track each stage of the development, and then they have checkpoints. For example, how are we doing against CIS security benchmarks? How are we doing against Well-Architected best practices? And then they have a dashboard that says, out of all of these 1,000 applications, we have this many high-risk issues open in these production workloads, and they prioritize the fixes accordingly. So the teams who go in there to fix the security issues, to make things more cost efficient, to improve their operational excellence, can prioritize how they go about doing that. They treat their architecture just like code. They treat their architecture just like modern DevOps, and they've rolled it all into one, into common dashboards for the CTO. So for the first time, really, customers can answer that question. Are you well-architected? Yes, because we have this many outstanding high-risk issues in this many production workloads across these pillars, and we have these best practices we need to apply to them, and they burn down those just like they would burn down dev tasks. And it creates this incredibly powerful tool. It's kind of simple when you think about it, but it's not something we ever really did before. Before we had TOGAF and ITIL and all that, but it wasn't really mapped to the agile constant deployment architecture world of the cloud, and Well-Architected is, especially when you couple it with partners like we saw SHI or IOLAP or Bellfleur and tools like NOps. It creates a really powerful process that you and your partners can use together to make sure you're continuously Well-Architected. So lastly, I'll just finish up on 2 things: how you can do these reviews. So we pride ourselves on self-service. You want to do it yourself, you can use the Well-Architected tool in the console. We also have a number of white papers, both the core Well-Architected white paper, but also those lens workload-specific guidance white papers that you can see. It used to be we just had the white papers. Now we have an in-console AWS tool that is augmented and made even better by tools like NOps. You can then go in with a partner. Again, we saw the partner slide that JT shared earlier. We have a partner program that they'll speak to later that makes it even easier and creates incentives for our partners and for our customers to work with partners to help fix those issues. And one thing I've definitely learned over the last 2 years is finding issues it's important, but it's only 1/10 of the battle. What's actually important is fixing those issues. And with the visibility that you get through Well-Architected into these issues comes great responsibility to fix them, and the partners can help with that. And lastly, of course, you work with your account teams, whether it's professional services, your TAMs, if you have enterprise support, or solutions architects at AWS. We all kind of work, and depending on your level of engagement with AWS, but you have the same questions. There isn't like some superset of secret questions with Well-Architected you get if you're working with an SA. It's the same. We use the same stuff for our services. In fact, Well-Architected had to pass a Well-Architected review to be launched in the AWS console. So we dog food it. So some customers, if you go to the next slide, who are doing this at scale, I just picked a few sort of at random, some large names you've probably heard of. Cox Automotive has really been an amazing early adopter of Well-Architected, has been with us through the whole journey, and they're a great one. If you look up our AWS reInvent conference videos, they're a great example of deep integration of that measurement that I was talking about in sort of a DevOps style into their methodology, into how they build anything in the cloud across hundreds of applications. Large, newer companies like Expedia that are really quite agile, and then more traditional companies like Liberty Mutual have really reinvented themselves in the cloud. And all of these companies share something in common. They're all using Well-Architected at scale across tons of applications. They're using it in a consistent sort of DevOps-driven way. And they're not just using it as a checklist or a framework. They're really using it as a set of core guidelines for how to build and release anything for their customers in the cloud. So, there's a lot more where these came from, but I encourage you to go and look at these case studies and see the videos and see for yourself how they're doing it. It's the most powerful thing you can do to see how your peers in industry are leveraging Well-Architected today. So with that, I'll pass it back to John, and John's going to take you through some more detail. But again, thanks for having me on here, and I look forward to helping all of you with your journey to the cloud through Well-Architected.
Yeah, actually, before we pass it to John, just real quick, Matt, I think one of the things you mentioned that really kind of resonated with me, because I'm a strong believer of Well-Architected, what it allows companies to do, is that, like, not all workloads are created equal, right? Like some workloads could be just like a bunch of Lambdas. Some workloads could be running a traditional SaaS product on an EC2 instances, and some workloads could be, running on a containers, right? So this is probably the best way. This is the only way I know to evaluate those workloads differently. And all the work you guys are doing with the lenses allow you to kind of evaluate specialized workload like machine learning workloads, big data workloads, or serverless workloads. So, thanks for kind of doubling down on that. I think it's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, it's, two biggest requests I've gotten from a product feature request is definitely how can we add our own questions? And, you'll show that in a second through NOps. And secondly, we need more workload specific guidance, both for industry verticals and for technology domains like serverless, like machine learning. And so, we continue to listen, and you're spot on, JT.
Perfect. John, do you want to take it away and maybe talk about some of the recent updates on the cost financial management?
Yeah, absolutely. So as many of you know, the Well-Architected framework actually went through a very recent update, right, Matt? Like a month ago or so, we had a pretty big update to the Well-Architected framework. And one of the interesting updates that we pulled out to talk about today is that of cloud financial management. And the reason we pulled this out is because it's actually one of the more abstract concepts that was added to the Well-Architected framework. A lot of things in the Well-Architected framework are very prescriptive. Don't let your root account be used, right? Let's have multi-factor authentication, those sorts of things. But this was a very interesting topic that actually spans across multiple disciplines. And so we wanted to try to take this topic and really kind of give you some ability to apply it in your business. So what is cloud financial management? Cloud financial management is this idea that organizations, by leveraging the Well-Architected framework, can see better business value, right, through the proper optimization of cost in their environment. And optimization of cost doesn't necessarily mean what's the absolute cheapest thing for me to do. Optimization of cost in this context follows these kind of 6 points that we're going to talk about. And what's really interesting about this is that we're going to not only talk about how these topics can be used in your business, but also like how NOps can bring these topics straight into your face and allow you to see these things. So we're going to go over this concept of functional ownership. We're going to talk about the partnership between finance and technology. You might have heard folks talk about the intersection of the CFO and CTO office and why those things are important. We're going to talk about why budgets and forecasts are not what you think they are, and that they're a little bit different in the cloud world. We're going to talk about cost-aware process and culture, and the concepts of how DevOps has kind of permeated throughout most environments, and why cost is kind of that next thing that has to be brought into that process. And finally, we're going to discuss the concept of really quantifying the value of cost optimization in ways that aren't dollars and cents necessarily. So as we move on, we're going to talk about functional ownership is the first thing we're going to talk about here. So one of the important things about this concept of cloud financial management is that there is this idea of enablement and authority and the ability to actually get something done. So what we mean when we say a function, right? We mean a person, a team. It can be a currently existing group, but someone that you're going to give responsibility and authority, and that you are going to enable that group, organization, person to drive cost culture and cost optimization practices within your organization. It does you no good to assign this function to someone and then not give them the ability to do their job, basically. So one of the important things here is that this is not something that just, this is not a ground up thing, right? While we would love to see this practice as ground up, and you can do that, this practice requires executive sponsorship, because not only are you going to be able, making decisions about technology, you're going to make decisions about how we spend capital in the organization, how we plan for the future. And if you don't have the proper level of, authority or clearance to receive the information you need to do your job, and a proper level of enablement to enforce standards and these sorts of things, then it's really hard to get this practice off the ground. Another interesting thing about this practice is it really requires you to be multidisciplined. And so it's very rare to find a single person in an organization who possesses all these skills. And so most often you're going to have to bring a lot of different groups together. We're talking about project management skills. We're talking about the ability to look at things from a data science perspective or a financial analyst perspective. There's a running joke among a lot of us that we all have IT jobs. We've been doing this IT thing for a long time, and we wish we all had finance degrees so that we can understand kind of the deep implications of the decisions that we're making around how we build and deploy software and infrastructure. And one of the cool things about NOps is it really enables this idea of functional ownership, because we bring all this data out and we allow folks to access this data and parse this data in the ways that they need to in order to be able to do their job. And as we move on to the next slide, this brings us into the concept of partnership. So this cost idea used to be just the domain of kind of the CFO's office, right? You're a developer, you spun up a bunch of stuff, you'd get a nasty gram in your email that says, hey, you spent too much money on AWS this month, you need to dial that back. And what we want to try to enable and show is that cost is more than just a, hey, you spent too much money, right? And in order to do that, what we're going to do is form a partnership between technology and finance. And we're going to do that by bringing visibility. So we're going to have real-time visibility into cost and usage. We're not going to guess at what we're actually spending things on, but that's more than just how much we're spending. It's what we're spending things on. How much is the production workload? How much is the development workload? How much are the data costs as we transfer things between regions and these sorts of things? And what we're going to do is we're going to help each other understand why these costs are important and what do these costs actually mean for us. So we want to be able, this idea of cloud financial management and a function, this function has to be able to act as like a strategic advisor for your entire organization. This is how we're going to spend money, how we're going to purchase RIs or not, which infrastructure we're going to use, these sorts of things. And we want to make sure that we don't kind of burn everything to the ground, right? So we want to take our existing processes that we have for the approvals of how much are we going to spend and how are we going to spend this. And we want to improve those processes. We want to bring technology into the finance office, and we want to bring finance into the technology office. And we want to create a shared language, because these things are not different. It's much the same as how we need to bring security into DevOps. and how we want security to be a common language across our entire organization. We have to treat cost and the optimization of cost in the same manner. And so let's talk about how we're going to do that. So in the next slide, we're going to talk about budgets. And budgets, okay, how much did I spend in AWS this month? Yeah, it's a budget, but it's not very helpful. And so as JT and Matt mentioned, the idea is not how much does my entire AWS bill cost, but how much does a thing that brings me value cost. And in the case of InOps, what we do is we take a construct we call workloads, and a workload being something, a container of AWS resources. And so what we're allowed to do there is, as workloads change, scale, new services might get released, right? Things change in AWS quite often. And we're allowed to view that workload as a value producing object, and we're allowed to tie a budget to that workload. But it's more than just tying it to an entire workload. We can now look at things individually. So maybe I want to look at all EC2 costs across all accounts, and I want to tie that into a workload. Maybe I want to look at just network traffic, for instance, and we want to tie that into a construct of a workload. InOps allows you to do these things and to be able to assign the function of cloud financial management out to individual organizations and allow you to have metrics that you're going to report on, and allow you to really pull value out of the individual things that you're using. Another interesting thing about budgets in this case is that we're used to being able to say, well, you know, I think I'm going to spend $1,000 last month. This is what I spent last week. This is what the price is of certain hardware. We can kind of scale that. But the problem in the cloud is that we're so flexible, and we allow people to access things so easily that it's almost non-predictable, right? Usage from one day to the next is completely different. And so not only do we have to think differently about how we assign budgets when we think about workloads and these sorts of things, but we have to think differently about how we actually predict budgets. So no longer are we just looking at historic trends, right? But we have to consider business drivers. The recent pandemic clearly brought to light different business drivers that would affect the budgets of what we're trying to do. And in the past, these things were a little bit more rigid. You might have your budget for the whole year planned out, but in the cloud, that's no longer the case. You're allowed to be very, very flexible with your budget, and you're allowed to really be agile, right? As Matt mentioned, as we take these well-architected frameworks and we apply it to this agile world, our budgeting needs to become more agile as well. So the next 2 points are actually really interesting. So we're talking about cost-aware process. So when you think of DevOps, right, we took all of these processes and we tried to automate them, and we tried to shift left a little bit. And then we tried to do the same thing with security. We want to shift left with security. We want to make sure that security is involved all the way through all the process. Cost has to be thought about the same way, right? We have to make cost a core competency for our organization. Everyone has to understand what these costs are and how they relate to things. Because more so now than ever before, you're not just doing root cause analysis on something, you might be doing root cost analysis. Why is my AWS bill suddenly twice what I expected it to be? Why is development so much more expensive than I expected it to be, or that I budgeted for? And you have to be able to dive in. And InOps allows that in a bunch of really cool ways, because we allow you to correlate cost events to things like CloudTrail events or actual creations of instances. So if you're using a lot of serverless functions or something like that, sometimes it's hard to track like what is actually driving the cost. And InOps allows you to correlate all these things together and understand where these things come from. And so what that lets you do is it allows you to train your organization for this concept of cost awareness, understanding that your Lambda function is not actually free. It doesn't just cost what the individual function does. It has other costs. There are cascading costs that are associated with that. And it allows you to drive these kind of checkpoints, as Matt was mentioning, in your process to account for these costs. And along with cost-aware process, once we have these kind of processes that drive this thing, then we expand that, and we're going to drive cost-aware culture. So on the next slide, what we need to do is we need to take this concept of a process and how much does this process cost, and we're going to ingrain costs in it just like we did with operations, just like we did with security. And now we're going to expand that. We're going to create a culture that is cost aware. Now we're not hiding how much things cost. We're making things very visible. We're allowing individual organizations or business units to create workloads and create budgets. We don't want cost to become a roadblock, right? This is one of the things that we always ran up against in the security world is, oh, security is just trying to prevent us from, succeeding, from innovating and these sorts of things. And we don't want cost to end up in the same place. So we ingrain cost in the process. It becomes just the thing we do, right? And then we make everyone aware of what things actually cost and how that works. So one of the interesting ways that you can do that is by placing what are called enabling constraints. So you might think of an enabling constraint as a way to help you do things correctly, right? So you might gamify the way that your cost works, like which organization was able to drive the most cost-efficient features this month, which organization was able to deliver the same business value, right, but at a lower cost. You might be able to reward those different organizations, reward innovation in your environment. Hey, I was able to take this EC2 instance and a bunch of things on it and turn it into a bunch of Lambda functions, and I've made our organization a lot more efficient in this way. And so we drive this across all of the organization. And then that leads us into the last point, which is the idea that we have to quantify the value that we're delivering to the organization. It's not just about cost savings, right? It's about cost savings for a reason. And that reason needs to be known throughout your organization. It needs to permeate your organization. And so we have a bunch of cost savings data. Hey, I saved $100 this month. Well, what does that mean? What does that actually mean for my organization? It might mean that enough cost savings means that you can hire more developers in order to get your product to market faster. It might mean that creating a bunch of cost savings in your environment allows you to spend some more time doing cool, new, innovative things instead of worrying about, oh man, my EC2 instances cost a lot this month. So these metrics that we're allowing you to collect within InOps, it's important for you to associate those metrics to efficiency in your organization. It's not just about saving $100. It's about saving $100 while improving the efficiency of your organization. I was able to deliver something faster. I was able to solve 2 more extra problems this month because we had extra budget for these sorts of things. I was able to launch an additional EC2 instance in order to make sure that our application can handle load because we were able to realize cost savings somewhere else. And so it's very important to kind of quantify these savings within your organization to make them generally available so that everyone can see what these things are and use them to help drive technology decisions and innovation within your organization. So I say all this, and InOps is a very powerful tool that allows you to take this kind of abstract topic of cloud financial management and gives you that single pane of glass for you to be able to realize all of these things and see things like the budgets. You can see things like how much does a create instance cost in the environment. We can assign specific budgets to individual workloads. We can create individual workloads. We can map those to value streams in our environment and in our organizations. And then we can use this data and we can take all of this information and we can use it to make better business decisions for our.
John, that's well said, man. As we talk to customers, some of the executives at companies. So are you able to hear me? Sorry, I think your voice is breaking. Matt, are you able to hear me?
You're fine. Yeah.
I think we lost John. I was just agreeing with John. As we spoke with a lot of our customers, one of the feedback we get from the leadership at these organizations who are spending millions of dollars with AWS is that, you know, they don't want to stop people on like making changes, right? The whole reason you move to cloud because you want to accelerate the innovation. But what they do want, they want to empower people. They want to build that partnership where, you know, people are tying back the cloud spend or the cloud changes to the actual business value. So I think it's probably a perfect point to maybe demo how you can actually make well-architected actionable within the product. So let me see if I can switch to a different tab. Matt, are you able to see the product now? Just want to verify.
Yep.
Got it.
Perfect. Cool. So as both Matt and John mentioned, tools like NOps could bring that visibility, bring that partnership in your different teams, so you can kind of relate the actual spend to the business value. So in NOps, we do a lot of things. You know, we give you visibility. We give you visibility around costs and security. One thing we do really well than probably any other tool out there is this integration with the well-architected framework. So let me actually briefly talk about how we actually help you to view your cost and then actually bring awareness and, you know, make it easy for you to take action on any of the findings. So in the product, you're able to kind of look at your cost, and then you're able to kind of see how the cost is going up and down. Most of the organizations have, you know, hundreds of accounts. You can look at all your accounts to see how much are you spending across all these accounts and at what rate these accounts are growing. So if, for example, in one of the accounts, Elasticsearch is growing at almost 188%. If you want to know what are these resources, you can quickly look at those resources. And you can also look at who is using these resources. This is like bringing awareness across different teams. So you're able to kind of quickly see which teams are spending how much on a particular service or on a particular usage type or operation. And also, as John was mentioning, you can look at tags. You can see, you know, how you guys are in an organization, how the spending is going up and down. If you want to kind of see where is the cost increase coming from, you can quickly do that. In this demo account, everything is showing like it's going, if the cost is improving, but in most of the accounts, you'll see that cost per month is going up, and then you can kind of dive in to kind of see where that increase is coming from. So it just makes it very, very easy to get you that kind of visibility on you know, where the spend is coming from and how the cost is going up and down. And then you can also look at you know, where is the cost increase coming from. You can look at change management, where we kind of show you where what are some of the trends in your cost. So for example, in this demo account, US West cost is going up by 87% this month. And if you want to learn more, where is this cost coming from, you can quickly just kind of see there were like a lot of new resources launched, and you can kind of learn to see who launched these resources. But if you wanted to see if this US West 2 is how well US West 2 is architected, you could just search for US West 2 and see what are some of the issues. So there are issues around cost, there are issues around security, and there are some operation issues. Now you're able to kind of quickly look at where what are some of the operation issues in US West 2? So it looks like there are about 95 resources in this zone that don't have EC2 ABS tags. That normally means that no one kind of knows who's responsible for these resources. So we make it very, very easy for you to kind of visualize to see where are some of the challenges around different well-architected pillars. And you can actually drill down even further if you wanted to. If you wanted to kind of see, give me all the resources that were launched within this month. So you're able to kind of look at those resources and what are some of the issues for these resources, who launched these resources. You can quickly look at the config history to see who provisioned a particular resource. This is where John was talking about how we integrate with CloudTrail. So you can actually see, what is the root cost analysis, if you will, of all these new resources. And then you can also see, what are the new issues? Like Matt mentioned, this is not once done and kind of forget about kind of approach. In cloud, you're always kind of building and changing new workloads. So if you wanted to kind of see what are some of the resources that were launched this month and what are some of the new issues that were introduced, you can easily do that. For example, since August 1st, there was one resource that was launched in the public subnet. And then you can actually further define this where you can create these nice looking dashboards and share it with the team. So if you wanted to create a dashboard, it could be a HIPAA dashboard, or it could be just a well-architected dashboard. You can build these dashboards, and then you can actually, if you wanted to, let's say for a workload, you only care about, you want to make sure there are no RDS instances are over provisioned, and then you only care for a particular VPC. You're able to create these dashboards and share it with the team. So now anytime there's a new issue within that VPC, and for that particular team, you can get notified. This is so powerful because most of the time, I just feel like we treat all the workloads the same. And in cloud, when you're sharing an account, when you're sharing a VPC, we have to make sure that we treat all these workloads independently. We configure notifications independently. We configure budgets for these things independently. And we also give you great dashboards. Like we have a great HIPAA dashboard that comes right out the box. And you can also configure these for your VPC or for your region, wherever you're hosting a HIPAA workload. Same thing goes for SOC 2. You can actually define your workloads. And once you enable notifications, you only get notified for that subset of a workload. And lastly, let me just talk about the integration we have with the well-architected tool. You can actually look at a workload. You can define a workload. First of all, as John was demonstrating, you can select an account, you can select regions, you can select tags. Once you define the workload, you're able to kind of look at what is the health of that workload, what are some high-risk issues. You can also create a budget. And wait, before you can create budget, you can actually answer some basic questions about that workload. So you can say, you can actually answer questions around security or the cost financial management system. I highly recommend that you go through this exercise. So once you define a workload, you answer these questions. Some of these questions we auto-discover for you, so we give you visibility. And then you can share this, it allows you to better, create a budget for that workload. If you want to share a report, you can share a report with your notes with other team members. And it just, bring that visibility into your workloads, which are, like I said, not all workloads are created equal. So this exercise will really help you to bring clarity when you're making decisions around this workload. So let me actually just, I think we probably are running out of time. I just want to maybe touch on a few other things. Uber is one of NOP's customers. They were able to save almost 15% in 30 days. And I truly believe one of the reasons is that they leverage, NOPs, and they also leverage the well-architected framework to make some of these decisions. So they know what's important for workload. So this is one of our customers who's been really successful leveraging well-architected and NOPs. We also have other case studies where some of the partners who did well-architected assessment leveraging NOPs were able to, on average, save 18 to 50% on customers' account. And some of the next steps I encourage you guys all to maybe follow is maybe engage with a partner who can do a well-architected assessment, or maybe reach out to your AWS SAs or your account manager. If the partner finds a high risk issues, and if the partner moves forward with remediating those issues, AWS will give you $5,000 in credits, and they normally apply towards remediating that issue, those high risk issues. So I think it's a win-win situation. And lastly, I just want to give a shout out once again before we jump into Q&A to all the consulting partners who are supporting these today's webinar. And please do reach out to these partners. They're doing well-architected assessment for years. I think it's always helpful to have a second pair of eyes on your workload, and especially if they find something, they can help you to remediate, and you can get that $5,000 credit towards the actual work they might end up performing on your workload. So I truly believe it's a win-win situation. So we also have a lot of resources. Please, do check out NOPS. We have case studies. We have a bunch of blog posts. So, and feel free to reach out if you have any, if you need any additional resources. So I think it's probably a perfect time to maybe dive into Q&A.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we have time for, I think, maybe 2 or 3 questions. And without further ado, let's go ahead and just dive right into them. First question, what's a good methodology for evaluating non-monetary costs, such as risk impact?
I can take that real quick. So risk impact and these sorts of things, what you're looking at is what is the expected cost of, for instance, a security breach or downtime. And what you're actually looking at is not necessarily the cost financially of what that is. I think a lot of organizations do risk assessments and they go, well, if I get a security breach, I get sued for 150 grand, I can pay that off. What you actually have to look at is a little bit higher than that, is what does my brand lose in a particular security breach? How might that affect how my users see me and my potential for acquiring new customers? I mean, look no further than the Equifax breach to see how impactful something like that can be. So I think it's a long conversation to have around what these kind of non-necessarily financial things look like. I think the easiest thing, or excuse me, not the easiest thing, one of the best first steps is to look at not only what is the cost of fixing a problem after a breach, right, including those costs and that sort of thing, but what could possibly be the impact to your brand and your ability to acquire new customers post breach or post something like that. And that's something that your marketing team needs to help you with, right? Cost is a cross-functional thing. It's not just what your finance department says. So you've got to bring folks together, your customers together, and you've got to discuss these sorts of things. I don't know, Matt, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think risk varies depending on customer type, segment. There's a lot of dimensions that make it. There's no sort of fixed measure. we've certainly done some work and rely on work with some of our analyst partners to do, for example, cost of issue avoidance studies. One thing that immediately pops to mind is working backwards from benchmarks like the CIS benchmark for security. And that's certainly something that you can do in partnership with partners like nClouds and tools like NOps, or AWS Security Hub is a service where you can actually test against the CIS benchmarks from a tooling perspective. And I'm definitely seeing customers use that alongside. We saw JT talk about whether it's HIPAA or SOC 2, and take a number of different frameworks and methodologies, whether it's sort of security best practice benchmarks like CIS or more compliance regimes like SOC 2 or HIPAA eligibility, and then again sort of dashboard that and then make their own sort of customer company specific risk evaluation and turn that sometimes into a potential monetary figure based on their peers in the industry. It's like I said, it's hard to have a one size fits all, but I would encourage you to start with some of the most popular, well-known benchmarks and then correlate those with some of the analyst studies that have done on them, like CIS, for example.
Okay, great. Let's try and get one more in. Does NOps support OpenStack or private cloud environments? Do you support the top 3 cloud service providers?
We don't support OpenStack right now. We are the direction we're following is as AWS releases more lenses, we will support more verticals. AWS already has a lens for serverless and big data and analytics, so we will be adding support for those. And as AWS adds support for more verticals, we'll be adding support for that. If there's a lens for OpenStack, we will probably support that in the future.
And I can add that let's just say that a non-trivial percentage of our customers are using the well-architected framework and the tool to measure their workloads, not just in AWS, but wherever they may be on premises. And JT, I think you'd agree that if not a majority, certainly a lot of the questions in the framework today are asked in an open-ended and specific way about just following best practices in general. That isn't necessarily application specific or cloud provider specific. So I encourage you to start with the framework. We've put a lot of time and effort into really coming up with best practices for the cloud. Of course, we believe AWS has the most experience in this space, and you'll get the most bang for your buck out of AWS. But we're already seeing a lot of customers use this wherever they are operating. And it's in our interest to do the right things for customers wherever they are, including AWS. And I think as such, a lot of the questions, if not a majority, are already applicable to anywhere, certainly across some of the pillars like operational excellence and security. We're not getting down to sort of the nitty gritty of individual features of services. We try to keep things, again, open-ended so we can capture how you use it.
Okay, all right, great. Well, we are about 2 minutes to the top of the hour, so unfortunately that's all the time that we have for question and answer period, but I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions, and if we didn't get to your question, please know that the folks at AWS and NOps will be getting a copy of all of the questions that came in, and I'm sure somebody from the organization will be more than happy to follow up with you offline. Also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded, so if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. The webinar is also going to be living on the devops.com website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to devops.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. All right, I did mention at the top of the hour we would be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get to that. Our first winner today is Annette J. Congratulations, Annette. Second winner today, let's see, Frank T. Congratulations, Frank. Our third winner today is let's see, Gina T. Congratulations, Gina. And our fourth and final winner today is Carla O. Congratulations, Carla with a K O. We'll be following up with all 4 of you offline by email to get your gift card over to you. So check your inbox. If you don't see it there, check your spam folder. JT, Matt, John, thank you so much for a great presentation today. Lots of really good information. Judging from the questions that came in, I know the audience got a lot out of it too. So thanks again for your time, your expertise. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody. Please stay safe.